Without a doubt, the most common question I get asked from people who are getting started cooking Asian cuisine is how to cook rice. It may seem too simple, but I tell you what, it absolutely is not. Even if you think you're an expert on cooking rice, please do watch through this video because we're going to talk through the basics and also some of the complications of cooking rice. Cooking rice is fundamental to Asian cuisine, whether it's short grain rice in Japan or jasmine rice in China or any of the varieties of rice you get through Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, etc. Asian cuisine is all about eating rice for the most part. So we're going to go through today just how to cook it. It's not difficult, but as long as you know what to do, you're going to get through pretty easily. Now, if you cook a lot of rice, you're probably like me, you have a rice cooker already. That makes the whole process very, very simple. But it's not difficult to cook it on the stove or even in the microwave. I'm not going to take you through all the theory of it at the beginning, but we'll just kind of do it as we're going along. The first thing I'm going to do is choose a heavy base pot. A heavy base pot is always best for cooking rice because the heat is even, meaning that it's going to more or less steam rather than get hot spots and burn. I've got some rice here, some koshi curry rice. This is Japanese rice, but the same process would apply if you're cooking jasmine rice or any other variety of rice. Now in here I've got 3 of these rice measures of rice. This is a 180 ml capacity measure, so about 3/4 of a cup. But measurements when you're cooking rice on a stove actually don't matter all that much. If you're using a rice cooker, it is quite important because a rice cooker is a closed system and it's only going to use the available water and steam, etc. that you put in there. So you use your rice measure. Inside your rice cooker, you've got a gradient that tells you how much water to put in. You close the lid, you press the button and your rice gets cooked. If you're doing it on the stove, it's a lot more lenient. You don't need exact measurements or anything and you'll still get great rice. First thing I'm gonna do is go over to the sink. Now the reason you have to wash rice is actually twofold. In the old days, it was actually quite dirty. You get stones and sticks and actually bits of dust and dirt in there. These days the process is much cleaner, so the actual cleaning of the rice is not quite as important, but you still do have to wash it. All of these grains, when they're transported, they kind of rub together and they create a kind of rice flour. And if you don't wash some of that off, it can make your rice quite gluggy. So to wash it, don't put it in a sieve or a colander or anything. Just put a bit of water into the pot, swish it around with your hand and pour the excess off. Doesn't need to be all the rice out, just some of it. You can see it's quite cloudy, that liquid with the rice flour that's come away. You only need to wash the rice maybe about 3 times just to get some of the excess flour away because some of the stickiness is quite good. It means you can pick it up with chopsticks, means you can actually eat the rice without having to have those grains all completely separate. You do want them sticking together a little bit. And that looks pretty good there. Now, you put the water in there that we're actually going to steam the rice in. How much water, you ask? Well, it's a pretty simple process. Take your finger. You look at your knuckle of whichever finger, I tend to use the middle one. You put the water in until it measures up to that first knuckle. So you touch your finger to the top of the rice, you measure the water up to the first knuckle, and that's how much water goes into the rice. What should be obvious from the beginning here is that it's not a particularly scientific process. Everybody's knuckle is different, the amount of rice in the pot is different, the size of the pot is different, and regardless, you're always going to get a good result because of the cooking process. The cooking process is going to allow the rice to choose the amount of water it absorbs. Let's go to the stove and I'll tell you what that means. So I'm using my induction cooktop here, and this is a perfect way to cook rice. All of your very, very high-end rice cookers these days are essentially a heavy base pot on an induction surface, and they can fetch more than $1,000, sometimes $2,000 just for a rice cooker. And you can recreate the exact same thing at home, just with a pot and a stove. So at this point, you can soak the rice if you want to. It's not 100% necessary for white rice, but you can leave that for half an hour, even longer, and it will just absorb some of the water there and it'll make your rice a little bit fluffier. It's totally fine, however, to cook it straight away. If you were using brown rice, I would recommend you let that soak for about an hour, but I don't actually cook brown rice by itself all that much. I don't really like the texture just of brown rice. So I'll often mix brown rice and white rice, maybe 50-50 in ratio. And in that case, the brown rice will actually cook faster because the white rice expands and almost works like a bit of a pressure cooker, forcing the water into the brown rice. But we're just cooking white rice now, and this is how we do it. First, we bring this to a hard boil. Now, on induction, it's a very direct heat, so you don't want to go up to full. If you were using a gas or electric stove, full power, just bring it to the boil and let it boil away. For induction, I'll go for about 3/4 power because I don't want that rice to burn on the bottom even before it started cooking. You can see that's really boiling now, and I just want to leave that for a few minutes, maybe about 5 minutes, until the volume of the water hits the rice that's expanding. So the water is evaporating away, but it's also being absorbed by the rice. So the rice is kind of choosing how much water it needs to absorb. The rice is going up, the water's coming down, and when it hits the top, you'll start to see like this, little holes where steam's coming up through. At that point, turn the heat right down low, put a lid on, set a timer. Again, it's not that important how long for, somewhere between 12 and 15 minutes, and just let it go. It will just steam inside there very, very slowly, and the rice will get fluffy and really delicious. When your 12 minutes is finished, just leave it. Don't take the lid off just yet. Let it steam for about 5 minutes with no heat on it whatsoever. And then after 5 minutes, take the lid off and use one of these things. This is called a shamoji in Japanese. It's basically just a rice paddle. And we use that to turn the rice over. So again, I see rice recipes where they say, fluff the rice with a fork. I can guarantee you no Asian person in the history of the world has ever fluffed rice with a fork or even a chopstick. We always use a rice paddle. And it's just a cutting motion of the paddle, so not smushing the rice down, but cutting through it, turning the rice over, and then actually leave the rice for about a minute, 2 minutes, just to let the excess steam go away. So the rice becomes fluffy, a little bit glossy, a little bit sticky, and that is perfectly cooked rice.